I am the one and only Blackie Lawless, and this is Chris Holmes. Speak for them, Chris. Sometimes he has to stop.
The subject of today's Metal Mythos is a band utterly apart, one that seemingly subverts every label thrust upon them. Not quite hair metal, but not quite heavy metal, but not quite hard rock either. With a bang of Blackie Lawless thundering at their head, their one unifying principle seems to be, first and foremost, write killer fucking songs and worry about genres goddamn later, and that they fucking do. More than 3 decades distant from their debut, this band are still sending up scorching screeds to stand beside any single note of their classic material. An American original so savage, they were the only other band famed manager Rod Smallwood, who you may have heard from, a minor metal outfit called Iron fucking Maiden, ever saw fit to recruit otherwise. Much like Dokken before them, if you've ever dismissed Blackie and the Boys as mere hair metal, consider today's Mythos my official, righteous rebuttal. The bane of politically correct Puritans, the band Tipper Gore still suffers night terrors about. It's time to crank those speakers, bang those heads, and dive dick fucking first into the world of W.A.S.P.
Tell you, I'm intense. I should have been born triplets. I got 3 times the intensity, 3 times the sex appeal, 3 times the macho any man alive. You know why the guys all come to these shows and you never see girls? Because all the guys got their girls home locked up. They don't want them to come home sitting here seeing us because they go home getting the Vaseline thinking about us. That's why they never come out here anymore.
Many non-fans are well aware of the W.A.S.P. New York Dolls connection, however tenuous, but fuck that shit. This is Metal Mythos. Let's get to the fucking music.
We were looking for a way to make a living. I mean, some people will do anything to keep from working, you know what I mean? We started out, oddly enough, as a recording band. And a lot of people don't know that. We never really had any intention of ever playing live. You know, we're sitting in a recording studio all this time. We're in front of a 24-track machine, and the machine doesn't applaud for you when you do anything good. So we thought, well, we got to go out and get some instant gratification.
We were screaming at it.
Really, you know, nothing was happening except the needles were going like that. So we chose a name that was controversial without really being controversial. So that's to say, if you know what the name means, fine, and if you don't, that's fine too. It's a bug, right? You know. so, right, you know, flying around, stinging you on the rear.
After passing through the Ellis Island of hair metal known as London, shacking up with Motley Crue main man Nicky Sixx, and ultimately falling the fuck away from each other, a leaning tower of unbridled motherfucking metal known as Blackie Lawless, along with Axeman Randy Piper, decided it was time to tear the fuck into the fray with a sound entirely their own. Initially a mere studio concern comprised of Lawless and, of course, Piper on rhythm and lead guitar, respectively, glam journeyman Rick Fox on bass, and Tony Richards on drums, they laid siege to the Sunset Strip, marrying the makeup-laden look of the New York Dolls with the blood, guts, and gore of the almighty Alice Cooper. W.A.S.P. was Motley Crue on crack, flinging raw meat and spewing blood into the crowd as Blackie beat the silicone out of some slutbag drenched in blood on a torture rack. It was basically Manson before Manson, but it all started with a single.
Somebody was asking me the other day how I got the idea for the song Animal. Said I hooked up a videotape in my bedroom, rolled it back, made it rhyme.
We wanted it on the album, but there was a problem with EMI in England, and there was a huge controversy that the local government there had threatened the EMI officials that if they put that single on the record, they were going to go to jail.
Enter the band's manager, a name familiar to the Mythos faithful, a man as legendary as he is unfortunately named, Rod Smallwood. The brains behind the immortal Iron Maiden. Record company won't drop the record. UK government is threatening to throw you all the fucking jail if you press the fucking thing. Fuck it! Go indie!
Rod kind of was like over the top of it. He could see where it needed to go because he had already walked this path before with Iron Maiden. So he knew where to take it and where to put it. And it was Rod's idea to do the single for the 12-inch for Animal, for Fuck Like a Beast, because when EMI said they didn't want to release it, I thought, well, then that's it. That song's going to get buried. And Rod said, you know, life gives you lemons, you make lemonade.
The single was a smash, and the album that followed, sadly sans the Animal track that was intended as the album opener, was not far the fuck behind. So massive a debut, the band was even featured in an 80s fantasy B classic, The Dungeon Master.
Congratulations, Excalibrate.
But it was your musicality, the metal act in question, that shined infinitely brighter than the theatrics. I mean, how many frontmen do you know that sound this much like the record within a live context? Blackie fucking Flawless is more like it, but when the time came to move from dropping demos to cutting an actual album, the revolving door of lineup changes had already begun. Rick Fox was out the fucking door to join Steeler, yes, the very same Steeler we've already established launched a young Yngwie Malmsteen, and so Blackie tapped his former bandmate and sister, the platinum blonde bombardier Chris Holmes, to sling the axe once more, and sling he fucking did.
I was thumbing through a copy of Hustler magazine. There's a section in the back called Beaver Hunt, which is where all these voyeuristic men send these somewhat less than professional snapshots of their wives in and what have you. And they always have one for the ladies usually, and it says for ladies only. Well, I looked at it and here's this blonde thing standing there. And
real funny, he called me up and he says, well, I hear you're a guitar player. I said, yeah, I play guitar.
And the first thing I said to him was, how tall are you? And he said 6'5". I said, how long is your hair? He goes, about halfway to my rear end. I said, you got any zits? He goes, no. I said, come on down.
Best track, throw a dart. Worst track, don't make me fucking laugh. Hair metal, glam, shock rock, fuck, call it assless chaps metal for all the fuck of me. This record, particularly the 1998 reissue with Animal Fuck Like a Beast included, as it always should have been, is one of the greatest heavy metal records in the entirety of the 1980s. Top 5, fucking easy. Get it.
Some things on the inside of the album sleeve that you'll see this time, which is called The Last Command, which will be out relatively soon, where you slide out the inner sleeve and it's a picture of our 4 heads on stakes, and you'll see those heads on the stage and the eyes light up red and fog comes out of the mouth and nice little things like that. Creates lasting images when a kid tries to go to sleep at night.
It's real that you put satanic message in your music.
No, we've never done it. Hey, listen, if I wanted to do something like that, I would put it right on the cover of the album.
Ah, The Last Command. What would a raw as pork liver debut be without the impossibly overproduced follow-up? The Blackie Brigade having conquered the world with the self-titled W.A.S.P, the frontman naturally assumed, having produced a gold goddamn record, he might be afforded the courtesy of producing the follow-up. Evidently, in their cocaine-induced turbo stupor, they neglected to account for the fact that it was the 80s, and good goddamn if the record companies didn't have the world by the huevos.
The record company, EMI, insisted that we use an outside producer because I did the first record largely myself. And it gave it a polished sound, one that I wasn't ready for. I was not really happy with. It was just a little too polished sounding for where we were. Somebody said later it sounded like you went from your first album to your 4th album.
Sure, there may be a bit more pomp and polish here, but Bash this bullshit at your fucking peril, because The Last Command as a standalone work of metallic might will suffer no slings and arrows. Whether it's Inebriation Anthem Blind in Texas or the Bulldog Ballad Ball Crusher, added polish or no, this is a merciless motherfucking classic and a must-purchase right alongside its mandatory metal predecessor. Most bands can't one-up their classic tune in 5 records. W.A.S.P, with The Haunting Wild Child, did it in exactly 1. But whatever melodic progression there is here shouldn't be confused with an outright severance from the band's roots, as proven by Cries in the Night being a recycled standard for the pre-W.A.S.P project Circus, entitled Mr. Cool.
My name is Cool. I'm Mr. Cool. Yeah, my patience wasting. I'm giving cries in the night. I can't wait another day. No, tell me no lie. I'm standing cold in the light.
Look, is there some filler here? Fucking sure. But even that is a cut above the rank and file. Fucking buy this goddamn record. Of course, it was on the subsequent tour that W.A.S.P's support act would be a young Metallica, and thus the shows that followed became ground zero for the burgeoning conflict between real metal and hair metal. RANT? RANT. Oh, comparing Metallica and W.A.S.P. How can you even make the comparison? W.A.S.P. is just hair metal. First and foremost, what in the fuck actually is hair metal? Any metal band with hair? So what, Dave Mustaine, Douchebag Daryl, and Gall? Hey, well, you're right, that genre really does blow. More to the point, who the fuck does it disqualify from being metal? What, Kerry King, Cover Killer, and Bret Michaels? Yeah, alright, fair enough. If teasing up your hair and wearing mascara made you hair metal, Olivia Newton-John was hard fucking core in the 80s, and you know what? So was everyone the fuck else. It was the 80s. It was the look. Get the fuck over it. I seem to remember Slayer rocking the runny mascara in the mid-80s, yet for some reason that doesn't stop Fairy King from flapping his 5 chins about how, and I quote, "W.A.S.P isn't metal, it's a Punch and Judy show with chains for decoration." Oh, con fucking trare, you bitch-titty bedwetter. I'd sooner spin any W.A.S.P record than listen to that talentless twink shred aimlessly away while the melody of the metal tune in question stops for fucking cigarettes. Thrash was neat at the time, a necessary counterpoint to fluffy fagaloons like Extreme and Enough's Enough, but its time is done now. Black and death metal left it in the dust for sheer extremity long the fuck ago, leaving these limber dick losers shredding away at music marginally heavier than their hair metal counterparts, but outright puss baggery when paired against the legitimate metal underground. If thrash fans were fucking honest, they'd admit that for every Razor or Heathen, bands who don't sacrifice melody at the altar of aggression, there's 15 fuckloads of interchangeable ass canyons who think a diminished fifth is when your bassist hogs the Jack Daniels. You elitist assbags can take your camo cargo pants and the battle jacket your mom sewed for your fat ass and fuck right the hell off. Some thrash rules, most sucks ass through a straw. Deal with it, dick knob. Next.
New LP's called Inside the Electric Circus. Why don't you tell us about the title?
Inside the Electric Circus is a compilation of ideas of things that have happened to us touring the last 3 or 4 years.
Dublin, Ireland, 1986. The sound man in the middle of the arena said he felt the explosion and it knocked him back. It actually picked me up off the floor probably a foot. I mean, I was airborne.
Blackie's crotch rocket had exploded and set his legs on fire.
I've got hair missing on my legs now that it's never grown back. I mean, it burnt me pretty bad.
Up goes the firework. It's very spectacular. In fact, there is one case on record when it exploded the wrong way with, I think he had to be taken off to sort of, not quite intensive care, but care anyway.
Whoa, look out! Here comes trouble!
With 3 albums in as many years and 3 world tours to match, it follows that the W.A.S.P faithful would soon find themselves inside the Electric Circus. And a more aptly titled release there never was, because by this point, an Electric Circus is precisely what W.A.S.P had become.
You know, I'm standing there, and there's no lights on. I can barely see anything. And all of a sudden, the next thing I can remember is I was looking at the ceiling, and my roadie drugged me off stage, and I was looking at my amp. And somebody had carried a rump roast about this big around, and this kid had thrown it up on stage and smacked me in the face. That's like getting hit with about a 50-pound rock.
But the real Circus wasn't even on stage here. Having replaced their drummer on the previous record, it was now incumbent upon Blackie to replace an outgoing guitarist, Randy Piper. And while his signature sound was certainly missed, it turned out to be a bit of a blessing in disguise. With Piper setting off for Splitsville, Blackie was allowed to return to his original tool of the trade.
Randy was going to be leaving the band. We knew that already. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to go back and play guitar. So I told Chris, I says, I really don't want to play bass. I call bass a tool of ignorance. And so I said, well, let me go back playing guitar, because I'm a guitar player by trade. Anyway.
The result is admittedly something of a holding pattern in the W.A.S.P discography. Not bad, not by 20 titty fucking miles, but a step down from its forebears? Fair fucking enough. This is an absolute exorcism of the juvenile exploits of their earlier repute. But what I found personally is that of the entire output of the so-called classic W.A.S.P era, it's inside the Electric Circus that appreciates with every listen. Whether it's the ravenous Ray Charles cover I Don't Need No Doctor, sloppy blowjob anthem Shoot From the Hip, or the atmospheric 9-5 Nasty, if you're looking for a dud, look fucking elsewhere. Chris Holmes' guitar tone in particular savages through the speakers here, perhaps never fuller or more heavy than right the fuck on this record. But if you want a true 3-ring fucking circus, look no further than Congress. Namely, the formation of a subcommittee replete with witch trial hearings to determine the propriety of music lyrics largely belonging to heavy metal bands like W.A.S.P, known as the PMRC.
And right about that time, there was this wonderful organization that cropped up called the PMRC. And the PMRC stands, theoretically, for the Parents Music Resource Center. They're an evil organization in the sense that whenever you dictate to someone how to live their lives between now and 20 years ago, things should be left to the individual as to what they think they should or should not listen to. If you don't want to listen to what we're doing or you don't want to watch it, then don't buy it. Don't go see it.
Do you think Tipper Gore's kids are listening to W.A.S.P albums now as a result of these changes?
I'll tell you an honest-to-God story. This is a true story. I was Frank Zappa about a year ago, and he told me, he says, you know where this whole thing got started? And I said, no. We had this infamous song, still do, by the way, called Animal, which we will be performing this evening. The subtitle shall remain nameless. Yeah. Fill in the blanks yourself, which God knows I've tried.
We've all heard accounts of the ensuing congressional battle from D. Snyder in painstakingly rehearsed and exaggerated fashion, might I add, on VH1. What many don't know is Blackie Lawless was originally scheduled to testify at the very same hearings, but upon advice from his publicist and band, gave the Pussy Posse a pass. No, Blackie's war with the PMRC would be every bit as savage as D. Snyder's, only it would play out in public and in musical form.
And I was reading one article in particular about an organization, you might have heard of it before, they're called the PMRC. They can suck me, eat me raw. This is Harder, Faster!
But for all his defense of the band's excess and innuendo, Blackie himself was a man in personal flux, dissatisfied with the innocuous lyrical content of his earlier albums, not to mention the album tour, Cash Money Carousel. Unlike oh so many metal stars who careened out of fucking control and crashed and burned, Blackie slammed the fucking brakes, cranking out the exceptional Live in the Raw to fulfill contractual obligations, replete with my personal favorite W.A.S.P tune, Scream Until You Like It, from the soundtrack to 80s B-horror cult classic The Ghoulies 2, he devoted the better part of the next year to stepping outside of the spotlight to figure out just what merry fuck he actually wanted to say with W.A.S.P. As far as W.A.S.P. were concerned, now wasn't the time to cash in. It was time to strip down, dry out, get their skulls firmly affixed to their fucking shoulders, and incidentally crank out perhaps the defining album of their fucking career.
That was the biggest pile of crap ever recorded by any band in the history of the recording industry. That was a tired record done by a very tired band because we'd done a record and a tour and a record and a tour. And at the end of it, we didn't know what our names were. So we did that record, aggravated a lot of people because it was so stinky. And then we said, okay, this madness is going to stop. We had done a record and a tour and a record and a tour and a record and a tour. And pretty soon, you know, you're bouncing off the walls like Daffy Duck, you know. It's like, hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo, you know. It's like trying to figure out who you are.
I don't want to get to the point where we're so serious that we've lost sight of having fun anymore. But why can't you still have fun, but say something along the way? And that's what we're trying to do with this. I mean, you come up with an album called The Headless Children, and immediately everybody's going to think out of us, well, W.A.S.P, The Headless Children, what are they doing now? It's not that at all. The Headless, well, the title track is an anti-nuclear war song.
Heavy metal, fuck music in general, you may have noticed, tends to follow a tried-and-true formula. The first album exists to establish credibility, while the second is for making moolah. It ain't always pretty, and it doesn't always work out that way, least of all in a modern-day music industry that's all but extinguished, the final victims of their own boundless avarice, but look, that's the way it goes, and for the most part, it gets the job done. So perhaps you can understand what a supremely rare occurrence it is for the Credibility album to pop out 5 albums and several gold records down the goddamn road, which is precisely what happened with 1989's harrowing Headless Children. Pivoting from their pussy-grabbing exploits and drug paraphernalia to geopolitics, social issues, death, and war. For fuck's sake, the title track is about nuclear war. Downbeat, dark, and heavier than Mechagodzilla's motherfucking nuts, The Headless Children is eminently addictive from the introductory 7-minute epic The Heretic to the breakneck refrains of Rebel in the FDG. The next time some cunt in camouflage cargo pants derisively describes W.A.S.P as, and I quote, a hair metal band, piston kick him in the prick and drop this record on the writhing fat-ass frame. As Blackie has rightly discerned in the intervening years, it was this album that not only broadened the scope of what W.A.S.P encompassed, but it also inoculated them from going up with the rest of the hair metal Hindenburg in the early 90s. Not at all unlike previous Mythos luminaries Dokken, if you actually think about it, but as we all know, the only world-famous story about W.A.S.P at the time came courtesy of Chris Holmes and his drinking habits.
Do you consider yourself
a piece of crap.
Why?
Well, because, you know, I work a job, and I'm a piece of crap.
Do you think rock and roll lifestyle turns you into an alcoholic?
Yes, it does.
How much of that do you drink a day?
About 5 pints. And why I drink is because, what?
What? But why do you drink, Chris?
Because it makes me happy.
Look, much has been made about how this single interview was some manner of death knell for the doomed hair metal subset, and while I break fucking wind at that hyperbolic horseshit, it certainly did have a declamatory effect on the band he represented. Blackie, to put it bluntly, was fucking furious. Here he was mid-pivot from the party-hardy, half-wit festivities of his former repute to a more serious, sincere offering about sweeping societal issues, his habits by then well in fucking harness. And here's his guitarist swilling what was decades later revealed to be fucking water, play-acting like a drunk douchebag so some sloppy-titted shrew can have an excuse to launch the hair metal killed hair metal narrative we'd all slurp like fucking Go-Gurt for the duration of the 90s. Thanks, Chris!
When you saw the Chris Holmes part, he's just guzzling in the pool. I saw that, and what was funny all of a sudden became very sad.
After seeing the movie, I was kind of like, man, there are a lot of creeps in Los Angeles, aren't there?
He said he didn't care where he was going to be interviewed as long as he could be drinking vodka.
The result, exit Chris Holmes and just about everybody fucking else.
The Headless Children comes out, and then you're no longer in the band. But what happened? I mean, were you fired? Was it an incident? Why'd you leave?
Oh, we do the Headless Children album. So there's some information found out about Blackie charging the producing fees on the other albums. And he said he didn't, and I found out from somebody that he did. And I asked him about it, and he goes, "Where'd you get your information? You're full of shit," he told me.
Okay.
And that was during the tour of that band, of the Headless Children, and I almost left in Germany.
There was some dissension in the band. I mean, it had gotten to the point of the last band where we were on tour, we had 4 guys occupying 4 separate dressing rooms. And that doesn't make for a rosy situation at any point. So, you know, I mean, basically it was a situation where everybody was hating everybody, you know.
And enter a bunch of hired guns, including Bob Kulick from Blackthorn, which you may have heard from my Graham Bonnet interview. Blackie was effectively all by his lonesome for a fact, but as we'd soon learn, his creativity was anything but exhausted.
I understand that this is kind of taking a little turn, a little something different than what you've been doing.
Well, I get asked one question by the fans over and over, and they say, give me some advice. How do I get from where I'm at to where you're at? I tell them the same thing over and over again. I say, you know, you really have to want this badly. And the one thing that they all say is, yeah, I want it, but they don't really understand what they're saying. And so I thought, I'm going to tell them a story and paint them a picture, and I'm going to show them the worst possible side of this business. And then once they've seen this and heard this, if they still think they want to do for it, be my guest, go for it.
Look, we all know what happened in '91. The flannel funnel cloud touchdown and the grunge NATO that followed laid waste to all the Aquanet coiffed cunt flaps in its path. For some, it was justified. For far fucking more, it was a needless baby with a bathwater scenario the record-buying public would regret before the decade was even done. Yet standing among the rubble, somehow unscathed by the Seattle siege, was W.A.S.P, or rather at that time, Blackie Lawless. With his band all but obliterated, the Lawless One set to songwriting for what at that time was intended as a solo offering, an ambitious, high-concept affair he since explained was in no way autobiographical, but rather informed by a lifetime of experience watching rock royalty rise and fall. The tale of a drunken, fumbling fuck-up who spots a guitar in a music shop window, appoints himself a metal god, and upon finding no fulfillment in the spotlight's glare, hangs himself with his own guitar strings, no less. Striking, moody, and miles beyond what the band had attempted previously, it wasn't until consulting with fans he realized it was properly conceived as a W.A.S.P release. And what a fucking release. Holding its own perfectly alongside recent Queensryche masterpiece Operation Mindcrime, this was a part of a two-fisted volley of voracious heavy metal concept albums to bookend the 80s and usher in the no fun allowed 90s. But while a hair heavy on the ballad side, there's an unmistakable edge here that its Queensryche counterpart lacks. Strangely enough, a full-fledged Crimson Idol tour, meaning one in which the album was performed in its entirety, would not be forthcoming for 15 fucking years when Blackie did just that in 2007 and again in 2017 to commemorate a re-recorded version of the album in question, but, you know, better late than never because this record is a beast. Gonna be straight up about this. I would sooner pierce my balls with a butter knife than listen to a concept album, but by God, if you must have one, make it the Crimson Idol.
I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't care about pressure from a label, and I don't care about when I'm supposed to go on tour, and all the time this is going on, you've got the fans in the back of your mind. You keep thinking, if I'm gone for a year and a half or 2 years, are they going to forget me? Then all these paranoias creep into you, and they become demons that visit you in the night.
The solo album turned W.A.S.P record trend continues, and while Still Not Black Enough is nowhere near as strong as the immortal Crimson Idol, it's no fucking slouch on its own terms. Suffering from a lack of promotion after all, it was 1995, this is a record that should have done infinitely better than it ultimately did. From the catchy as the clap title track to heartbreaking ballad Keep Holding On, this is a sincere, savage work that deserves infinitely more attention than it received at release. But for a Queen fan like myself, the standout came in the form of a cover. Still smacking of a solo project, but somewhat more confident in its W.A.S.P status, it never ceases to amaze me how obscure this album is. Never mind under the radar, this fucker is cloaked. If you dig the production of the Crimson Idol and some of the darker material therein, you owe it to yourself to track this fucker down. You will not regret it. With the band somehow maintaining their relevance, if not necessarily their sales, after all it was the 90s, there was no question W.A.S.P would re-emerge, but no one could have predicted the absolute mindfuck that was to come.
The coming year is going to be a good year for us, but it's also going to be a highly controversial year too. To make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, and if that's the case, we're going and raping the whole damn hen house. After we're done with this in the next year or two, all bands are going to have to become hippies because there ain't going to be nothing left to do. We are the ultimate. We are snuff rock.
Grunge may have gatecrashed the heavy metal menagerie, but they weren't alone. Between groove metal, pop, rap, and boy bands, there was a bounty of bullshit to go around, my friends, and foremost among them was the onset of industrial metal. Now, you can say what you like about the subgenre, certainly it's aged like Angie Dickinson's neck, but at the time, this was it. Marilyn Manson was gonna motherfuck your entire family, and that's all the fuck there was to it, folks. Raising the bar for unbridled offense, Alice Cooper's bastard baby boy haunted every American parent's waking nightmares, and W.A.S.P, newly reunited with guitarist Chris Holmes no less, wanted in on it. But for those doubtless eye-rolling already, assuming this was a matter of Me Too aimed at cribbing Marilyn's style, gonna be blunt about this. Nothing Manson has ever done will ever touch this album or stage show for sheer obscenity. And before you fire back, did Manson ever crucify a shrouded-faced nun, splay her pussy wide to the public, and fuck her right there on the cross with a knife dick? Did Manson ever murder a motherfucking pig on stage and wave the decapitated head through the audience?
This is show business. We're not curing AIDS or trying to present world peace here. This is...
Feels good, it can't be all that bad, right?
Unless you're the pig.
The live show then, you debase women. I believe that you rape a nun with a knife.
Nuns kind of...
Nuns are different than women, aren't they?
Well,
they're in a different category. Well, you know what it is, like I said, we didn't want to be a trip down memory lane. We said if we're going to do this, it's going to be intense. We're not doing anything that you're not seeing on TV as it is. We're coming to a W.A.S.P show is like watching the news for 55 minutes or an hour. We're just giving people exactly the decadence that the world is in right now. We're only reflecting it. That's it.
that's pretty sick.
In fact, in what was either tribute or a massive fuck you to Manson, on the 98 leg of the tour, Blackie replaced the nun with a life-size mannequin of Manson himself. That's right, folks. Blackie dragged Manson's lifeless body around by a noose, decapitated him, removed his butt-fucking brain, and knife-fucked the shit out of Manson on stage. Inspired by personal tribulations like both Chris Holmes and Blackie Lawless divorcing their respective spouses, Kill Fuck Die was as dark and raw as industrial metal got in the 90s, yet somehow without once forsaking the core hard rock roots brooding beneath all the fuzz and fuckery. For all the sonic ornamentation, these riffs are still quintessential W.A.S.P. Strip away all the compression and computer bullshit, many of these songs would be right at home on Still Not Black Enough or The Crimson Idol, and that's perhaps infinitely more impressive than merely one-upping Marilyn's flabby alcoholic ass. Let not the reviews deceive you. Kill Fuck Die just plain fucking kills.
We did an album called K.F.D, and we brought that show to Europe here. And a lot of people, that show really bent a lot of people out of shape, more so than what we had done in the first few years that we came out. I thought it was the best piece of rock theater I had ever seen, not just W.A.S.P, just anybody. I thought it was well choreographed. It was designed to make people real uncomfortable. It was a major political statement about what was happening in America at the time. The metaphors that we used, people did not understand the relationship or the correlation between some of the imagery that was going on. So, can you take it too far? If there's something to be said from an artistic point of view, no. From the general public's psyche or their collective mentality point of view, we found out that you can.
Take me to hell, I'm going there. I rise to hell, take me to hell.
This was designed to be the anti-K.F.D, because we had done K.F.D, and you also have to remember when we did K.F.D, Chris and I had gone through really bad breakups. He had divorced Lita Ford, and I had been in a relationship for 3 years that had come to an end that was really ugly, and it's just, I wouldn't say we were anti-women at that point, but we were anti-relationship at that point, you know.
With the band having gone about as far into profane fucking extremity as humanly possible, it stands to reason the follow-up would be a brighter affair. Instead, W.A.S.P returned to their fist-pumping, coke-snorting roots with a party metal record to rival even Electric Circus, inexplicably released somehow in the year 1999. If you want that classic W.A.S.P sound and nothing but songs about drug abuse, ramming groupies, and testicular hygiene, Helldorado is precisely what Dr. Rocker ordered.
Just suck. Don't cry, just suck. Don't get no cramps in your tongue. Come on, do the nasty love.
Designed to be the vaccine for the vacuous pseudo-artistic 90s, it simultaneously succeeds and stumbles somewhat in the execution of precisely that aim. With a stage show nearly as jaw-droppingly offensive as the one that preceded it, the album did serve to re-establish the Winged Assassins, at least in Europe, a region that was by now ravenous for the return of classic 80s metal. Helldorado is just that, an orgiastic expulsion of all things masculine and metallic. Can it be a hair on the repetitive side? Sure, but Helldorado's valleys are higher than most other bands' peaks, but after every orgy there comes the morning after.
I heard that you guys had a lot of debating from this album title, whether it should be Unholy Terror or not. So,
well,
why was that?
Because when you start dealing with religious subjects, you have to be very, very careful to make sure that if you're going to make a statement that people understand exactly what you're trying to say. This album is not an attack on personal faith. It's about my experience and Chris's experience of growing up in the church, and how the church teaches you to think the way they want you to think. But it's not just religion that does it either. Governments are famous for doing it to people. I mean, what you see on the news on television is really what the government wants you to see.
And And so the discord within the W.A.S.P experiment began to show. Unholy Terror was an infinitely more earnest work than its predecessor that, despite what the year of release and the title would suggest, was actually dedicated not to the 9/11 terror attacks, but to dissecting the laundry list of neuroses that drives young Christians away from the church in adolescence, a subject that was particularly close to Blackie's heart as he'd recently become a born-again Christian. Holy Terror is ostensibly a darker, more mature W.A.S.P work. And then Chris Holmes tears into Wasted White Boys, buried at the bottom of the track list by Blackie in a move that doubtless lodged in Chris's craw. It's no mystery why Holmes wasn't long for this band here. Blackie was clearly embracing a more socio-politically aware aspect that didn't jive with Holmes's rock-out-with-your-cock-out inclinations. But when this record shines, shit does it ever. The Whiplash Locomotive Man, the ruthless Let It Roar. But it's a 5 1/2 minute mini-epic by the name of Charisma that both lampoon televangelists of the era, and as Blackie later admitted himself, presaged the rise of personality cults like the one that later arrayed around a certain presidential candidate in or around the year 2008.
Here come the Messiah man to battle me, make me your God. I got 'em all marched to the rhythm, believing me, oh yeah, new religion. I'm gonna be the new world leader. I got 99 millimeter. I'm coming back to you, know I've got. Do you believe? Do you know my charisma? Do you know my name? I'm the God that you pray. Worship my name.
With straight-ahead rockers cohabitating with more contemplative passages, Unholy Terror is a sleeper standout in the more recent W.A.S.P discography, and the last proper release to feature that full, fucking killer Chris Holmes guitar tone throughout, albeit bracketed by performances by session guitarists such as Halford's Roy Z. Initially regarded as something of a departure, today Unholy Terror is appraised by many as the last gasp of vintage W.A.S.P. And while it's not an opinion I personally share, it sure shits on 90% of the modern metal on the shelves today. But world events were soon to transpire, robbing New York City of thousands of lives in an instant, and inspiring Blackie Lawless to perhaps the most furious period of creativity in his entire career.
Dying for the World, another political album. I mean, the September 11th incident made you make this?
Well, yeah. Well, I'd been down there a week before it happened, you know, and I mean, literally was looking at those buildings, and I thought, well, I'm going to be back in a few weeks. And I knew the Yankees were going to be in the baseball World Series, so I was going to be back. And I had no comprehension of what I was going to not see when I got back there. And the day I got back, I went down to ground zero, and there's nothing you will ever see in your lifetime that can prepare you for what that was, you know, and it was just had a dramatic effect on me.
To me, this album represents the birth of modern W.A.S.P. Somber, melancholic compositions cohabitating with classic headbangers, but eternally arcing toward the omnipresent darkness of the band's late 80s efforts. 2002's Elegy to the Fallen on September the 11th, Dying for the World, is a staggeringly sincere work. Blackie, you must remember, was NYC born and raised, and while he wasn't present when the attacks went down, I can scarcely comprehend the psychic effect of seeing two structures that provided the mental backdrop for the entirety of your adulthood reduced to a briar of smoldering steel. Like a metalliferous infant, Dying for the World came screaming to the world scarcely 9 months after the event in question, and in its most haunting passages, such as the harrowing Hallowed Ground, it's virtually impossible not to be moved in some manner. But it wasn't just a couple of buildings that was missing this go-around. By the time W.A.S.P laid waste to the Western Hemisphere on the Unholy Terror tour, Chris Holmes was well on his way out of the fucking band.
I was told I was written in as one of the songwriters.
Okay.
And found out about 5 years ago that I was written in as a session player, you know.
Uh-huh.
But my name's on the record as a songwriter.
Wow.
Now, in the past, I've taken a decisive stand on infighting within, say, Gorgoroth, Dokken, and beyond, but frankly, this is a rare case where I lack a fucking position, and for one perfectly rational reason. We've only really heard one side of the story. While Chris Holmes hurls epithets at his former bandmate with some regularity, Blackie himself has remained all but mum on the subject for the last 16 fucking years, never even formally addressing the topic until a rare press conference last year.
People get divorced for certain reasons. And there's times where the kids want the parents to get back together. But sometimes it never happens. This is one of those. Sorry.
And even that didn't come within 9 miles of addressing the impetus for Chris's exit. Look, I dig Chris Holmes. He has a killer guitar tone, and its absence, while not unforgivable, is absolutely noticeable and missed. Even his recent ridiculous solo records have a guitar tone that's thicker than freeze-dried rhino spunk, and his presence provides a much-needed fuck deficit for a band that otherwise lapses into terminal seriousness. But W.A.S.P? They're killer with or without him. Blackie's voice is still superb. The songwriting still slays. And if you get a shot at a show, do not hesitate. Fucking do it. And the same goes for this fucking album. Next.
Your latest CD is The Neon God. Can you tell me a little bit about this CD?
Well, it's a two-part work. Really, when I was talking about common denominators a while ago, I'm looking for ideas that, like I said, what links us together? You know, what are we thinking about the most? And when I was writing that, that was in the forefront of my thought. You know, who am I? Where am I going? Does my life have meaning? Has it got no meaning? Is there God? Is there no God? What's this all about? Why are we here? You know, so the very first lyric that you hear on the record, it says, "Oh, tell me, my Lord, why am I here?" Does any of this have meaning?
The Crimson Idol's darker, longer, veinier, younger brother arrived in 2004 under the eye-catching title of The Neon God. The concept here, in lieu of a fictitious rock biography with elements of fantasy, is instead more of a religious horror story with elements of biography and even sci-fi. A more sprawling and ambitious work than The Crimson Idol, it follows that The Neon God would span 2 albums, or rather it would after the retailers got their way.
Retailers won't take double records anymore. They'll take historical double record sets like The Wall or something like that, you know, but they don't want to take new double records anymore. Their argument is it takes up too much rack space, and it's like, you know, hello, that's a lie. You know, if they've got 2-3 centimeters in the width of a CD, and you're telling me that that's that much extra space, I'm not buying it. That's just another way for them to try to rip off the public.
And while it's 2 albums I hold in my hands, I'll be reviewing this as intended. A single, cohesive work, relaying the story of Jesse Slane, whose drug-addicted mother abandoned him at 8 and left him in an orphanage that doubled as an asylum, alarmingly similar in physical description and concept to the Shalebridge Cradle from Thief Deadly Shadows, which was released the same year as this record, coincidentally. As the nuns assume responsibility for the child, he bridles at their authority and finds himself imprisoned, tortured, and sexually violated by the demonic Sister Sadie, whose SS initials, black uniform, and silver cross necklace I'm certain are just a coincidence, in a harrowing sequence that nevertheless yields one of the truly killer choruses of Part 1. Upon Sister Sadie's mysterious death, he escapes the asylum, falling in with a street magician and telepath who teaches him to harness his mental abilities and manipulate the masses into giving them both money. As the two delve deeper into the occult and imbibe in orgies and other assorted bacchanal bullshit with their oblivious disciples, his flock begins to form a fucking billion-dollar industry. And as he addresses his faithful, his face emblazoned upon a screen in Times Square, he's christened, you guessed it, the Neon God. But when the main character's estranged mother falls in with the flock, the Neon God realizes the depths of his depravity and deception and attempts to leave the cult, at which point his bishops decide he's more useful as a martyr than a leader. But shelve the fucking concept for a beat, folks, because as a simple metal record, the Neon God is no goddamn slouch, eschewing the wanky, winding compositions and noodling guitar goat shit of lesser concept offerings for simple, direct metal tunes. Asylum Number 9, The Raging Storm, Sister Sadie, Resurrector, Come Back to Black, Tear Down the Walls. Even if you read not one word of the accompanying booklet or the website devoted to the Neon God narrative, this is vintage W.A.S.P. regardless. Much like the Crimson Idol before it, the Neon God is that rare concept record that works just as well when consumed casually as a heavy metal album as it does as a story. Get it. Next.
How do you spend your time between concerts, or do you drink before concerts? Do you fuck the I'm gonna fuck you after this. Next question.
Daddy's fighting shotgun on your knees today. The devil's begging to beg.
I can describe Dominator for you in a solitary fucking word. Anthemic. Having slaved away over a double concept album, doubtless consuming untold creative bandwidth in the process, it was all but a foregone conclusion the follow-up would be a much more immediate affair, and that's precisely what this poundin'-ass album happens to be. Dominate is A1 fucking right. From the monolithic Mercy to the ode to AC/DC Deal with the Devil, Dominator spits anthem after ass-ripping anthem with only the briefest respite to craft perhaps the most hauntingly beautiful ballad of the band's career, the heartbreaking Heavens Hung in Black.
No more tears, please. Hanging heaven back. No, don't you leave me to die. Don't you leave me to die.
A song so stark and atmospheric they even afforded an acoustic fucking reprise 2 tracks later. It's that fucking good. Of course, Blackie made Lindbergh baby headlines in metal media around this time for purporting that he would no longer be playing classic cut Animal Fuck Like a Beast in concert due to his renewed religious beliefs. And while half-baked butthurt bitches are still bellyaching about this bullshit 10 years later, I have to ask, am I the only one who gives less than a fuck? It's a great tune, sure, but Blackie's written better, folks. And I don't remember you Riri's reaming out Iron Maiden when they refused to play any fucking hits on their A Matter of Life and Death Dog and Fairy show. In fact, as I recall, metal media were all but throwing them a fucking parade, as a matter of fact. So what's the deal? You have to be a self-important wankster from Worksop to get a pass on this pissin' winery? It's one fucking song of the hundreds W.A.S.P have been pounding your thankless assholes with for decades. It's a great tune and all, but it ain't his fucking best, not even almost. So let it goddamn go already, you fucking aspies. Suffused with savage screeds about American foreign policy and politics, with particular attention to the rampant police actions we suffered under the outgoing Bush administration, Dominator is an album with a social conscience of Unholy Terror, but the songwriting of the Headless Children and the self-titled debut. If you prefer the in through the sternum, out through the spine, direct as a dick in the throat version of W.A.S.P, but steeped in a spectacular modern production, give this album a spin. It will dominate your asshole. Next. Enter Babylon, without question W.A.S.P's most topical, eminently political work to date, which, considering a previous album dealt with the World Trade Center attacks, is goddamn saying something. And when I say political, well, fuck, Blackie, you tell him.
If you could tell us a little bit about Babylon's theme.
Right at the end of Bush's last year in office, we were experiencing what a lot of people, politicians, were referring to as a global financial crisis. Crisis in political terms is code for watch out for your wallet. And I was also watching what was happening in the EU at the same time in Europe. And there was guys meeting in Brussels, and discussing what was going on over there in the European community. And one guy was describing this supposed global financial crisis as a time for action to maybe create a new one-world government, like a one-world system. And then another guy says, well, you know, if we're going to have a one-world government, then we should have a one-world currency. And then a third guy spoke up, and he says that they believed that they could have all of the EU microchipped.
Wow.
And I'm standing there with my mouth open, listening to all of this, thinking to myself, do these guys not understand what they're suggesting? I mean, this is potential 666, what they're talking about here.
Though eagle-eyed Michael Jackson fans may notice some slight similarities between monolithic monster ballad Into the Fire and a certain classic MJ tune. Upbeat and eminently fucking heavy, current events evidently imbued Blackie with renewed focus and vitriol, as Babylon would be my personal pick for best of the latter-day W.A.S.P records. This shit just does not goddamn quit.
Who is like unto the beast, giving his mouth great things to speak. If any man has an ear, let him hear, let him hear. Babylon's a burning, Babylon's a burning. 666 and 7.
And if you spotted those twin images of Barack Obama and Hitler, you wouldn't be alone. When asked about the apparent conflation, Blackie shot back like a fucking howitzer, outright admitting Barack Obama reminded him of Hitler and saying the comparisons were eminently fucking intended. After which the irrelevance police over at metalsucks.net weighed in with their usual modeled conglomeration of buzzwords and bullshit. And I quote, Number 1, Blackie Lawless is still alive? Number 2, did Blackie Lawless just compare a black guy to Hitler? Number 3, seriously, didn't Blackie Lawless die a few years ago? Number 4, didn't Hitler propose healthcare reform shortly before committing mass genocide, or were his death panels unrelated? Number 5, because it only gets funnier the 5th fucking time you repeat it, Blackie Lawless is still alive? Hey, Harold Hacky Sack, never mind Blackie Lawless, Metal Sucks is still alive? Seriously, didn't you all die of soy poisoning 15 fucking years ago? Suffer a whiplash injury at a Portland Poetry Slam? Bernie bumper sticker mishap? Remove the top 5 layers of flesh? But now I'm just fucking fantasizing. I guess that's what happens when you isolate that key demographic who are too big of pussies to compete in a free market, but just metal enough to bum the black nail polish off their fucking sister. Incidentally, Hitler's Germany did have healthcare and domestic reform. In fact, one of the only remaining institutions from the Third Reich is Germany's Child Protective Services Department, which is itself an extension of their national welfare programs. Why, it's almost like their name was shorthand for National Socialist German Workers' Party or some shit, or like it was derived from Italian fascism or some fucking noise. You know, Italian fascism, run by Mussolini, who was later quoted as saying, "Fascist government will seize the means of production when incentive is lacking or matters of the state are involved." Seizing the means of production? No socialism there, am I right? Incidentally, if the ironic t-shirt brigade over at the aptly titled Metal Sucks had done their goddamn homework for once, instead of stealing Carlin punchlines, they know Blackie's been commenting on politics and society since the ass fucking 80s. Fuck, back in 87, Blackie all but predicted the fucking future.
The PMRC has been a plague that has hounded us for the last 2 years in America. The PMRC has been nothing more than a political platform to put Albert Gore, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But Tipper Gore, who is Albert Gore's wife, has written a book. She is the head of the PMRC. She has written a book called Raising PG Kids in an X-Rated Society to fuel the fire for his presidential campaign, and was using me in that as well. To pick on me is one thing, to make money off of me is another, and the buck stops here literally on that. I don't want to see this ever get that far where a man like this gets put into the White House. First of all, I don't trust a man that sleeps with a woman like that. And if they get control of the FCC, which is our federal communication, then you're going to have a state that if people think America's conservative, no, they haven't seen anything.
Blackie, uninformed about politics? Find a fucking mirror, you gluten-free faggots, and maybe spin this record a few times while you're at it, because Babylon is bitchin'. Next.
We're about 3 weeks away from finishing the next one. So it will be out next year. And it will be called Golgotha.
What will the message on the album be this time?
Well, Golgotha is Hebrew for place of the skull. And it's the hill where Christ was crucified. And it's interesting when you see a lot of bands going around using satanic images or images of death and things like that. And I'm thinking, all they need to do is look at the source, because it's right there. I mean, there's more. If you want death, there's enough to go around there.
After a soul-sapping 6-year wait, Blackie at last bombarded us with another helping of heavy metal. And while I didn't find this one quite as immediate an affair as, say, Dominator or even Babylon, disappoint it most certainly did not. From the opening salvos of Scream, you know we're off to the races.
Was I your one gonna love? Incense rising from your flame. To worship one and to run. Your God's at war, yours to blame.
But the material is uniformly good to excellent here. From the soaring anti-globalist cannonade Slaves of the New World Order to the repentant religious borderline Striper-esque Christian strains of title track Golgotha, it may be a bit heavy on the acoustic intros, but the meat of the songs is filet min fucking yawn, folks. Myself, I do believe my preferred cut is a choice fuck you to the outgoing Commander-in-Chief.
Keeps pounding down now from the hand that wears the crown. The plantation's cotton's rotting so long. Yes, all knows thing you like the most. Your very kingdom cry.
Bottom line, Golgotha's got the goods. Meatier than Brock Lesnar's neck and 50 times as fucking listenable. This record would justifiably hit the Billboard Top 100 for the first time since the Headless Children. That's right, sob all you like, hipsters, metal's back, bitch. As you've no doubt noticed, given the lack of utter shit in this retrospective, you can't go wrong with W.A.S.P, and you sure as shit can't go wrong with Golgotha. That tears it for this retrospective, Rageaholics and Rivetheads. From the Mythos faithful to the W.A.S.P Nation, I'm Razor Fist. God fucking speed.
You know, I heard another joke the other day about San Francisco. How do you separate the men from the boys in San Francisco?
Oh, no, never mind that.
Crowbar, right?